I want to ask about the panels. So you describe it. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. The perfect fit, but like the fit has a lot to do with it. Where did that come from?
So originally, it's super interesting. When I was like designing my earlier pieces, like the thing I like kind of found is like I didn't like playing with silhouettes as much. It was harder for me to do that because like playing with silhouette is really hard. As if anyone is in design school, they know that, like, because you can do something that looks really cool like when you lay the pattern out, but then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is going to be the coolest silhouette. But then you have to really account for people's muscles and stuff like that. And so something to kind of supplement that, because I kind of felt bad. I was like, oh, I don't know how to like get like the,
like draping,
play with motions. And so I was like, well, I'm going to try to like find like the best fit, but something to supplement that in my design is what I did is I started playing with how the pattern was cut. And it first started really organically. It was kind of like, oh, I'm cutting a pattern just to make a cool shape, right?
Yeah.
And then I became more attuned to not only like, I kind of like started looking at like a lot of brutalist work, specifically just because it's like very basic shapes, but you kind of see how they play with each other.
Sure.
In really interesting ways. And I kind of started keeping that in mind when I started doing like playing with the pattern. And then I kind of like got a little bit more into fitness over the past 2 years.
Sick. I love that.
Not like huge or anything like that where I'm like doing bodybuilding, but just became a more aware of like the body and where your muscles are placed. And so I just kind of found like, oh, like these are natural lines, right? And so they can flow with your body if you put them in the right places.
Yeah.
And so, adjusting the pattern to match that in a way, not necessarily like perfectly, but to a point where it like at least flows with the natural lines that your body has, is just something that I found to be like really interesting, and I will keep in mind when I was designing. Yeah.
And for sorry, Kilian, I cut you off. I was just going to give context to our listeners. Karsten's your hoodie, the Swans hoodie. What kind of distinguishes it is that the pattern, the paneling of the piece itself is unconventional, and it achieves all those things you just described. It is cut in a manner where it is supposed to be better fitting, more form fitting. Kilian, can I still cut you off still?
Please.
Okay. So like you were just talking about, Karsten, you were talking about like you thinking about the patterns.
Right.
What was that process? Were you like sewing things? Were you asking for like, are you getting like samples made?
I have no formal training in how to sew. I have none, and that bothered me for so fucking long. Like you have no idea how like, but I really just like started like on Photoshop, and I thought, how could I cut up like this like garment? I know like from pieces that I found. Usually I go to vintage stores and I look for pieces that have nice cuts, and I say like, hey, I'm gonna take the sleeves from this one, body on this one. I do it that way. But a lot of it is then I would kind of like draw the lines on and do that, and then eventually I learned how to like make tech packs and like kind of like do the pattern on through Adobe Illustrator, just like making a tech pack. And then what I actually do is I send that tech pack to my producer who has Clo 3D.
Okay.
I'm familiar with that. And so then we take those pieces of pattern and put them into 3D modeling.
Oh, that's sick. That's sick.
Pattern, yeah.
And for context, I mean, I don't even know if it's context, Karsten. I have taken like sewing classes. I've taken books out of the library about pattern making, and I think I'm just gonna read this, and then I'm gonna get it. And I'm like, oh, geez, I have no fucking clue. I can't do any of this. So that at least it's a story that we can all relate to.
But it makes sense. Like you don't necessarily need to be on your hands and knees cutting fabric to be able to create shapes and patterns, right?
No.
Like, the technology is available to do it in other ways.
I mean, it was like at first, like, because there's such a sort of elitism about like doing it yourself and sewing. And I get it. Like there's like a lot of people like who went to like the Bunka fashion school for pattern. There's a huge history there, and I respect that for sure. The thing about learning that and learning it like really in depth is that it takes a lot of time. And I went to business school because that was what I needed, more secure, but also it helped me run the design side, the business side of the brand better. But just now with like the technology that you have, it's really possible for you to even like get a pattern, be able to create it from scratch, a pattern, do minor adjustments, put it into the technology we have. That technology is expensive, but it's super possible to do that. And it's actually a little bit less wasteful even, because when you're cutting pattern and you're wasting a lot of fabric. And the great thing is like we have like laser cut like in the factories, so we can get like the super most precise uses out of like the fabric. And making sure it's just it's like I don't see a reason that there's anything wrong with it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. Can we ask, like, where is the factory?
Factory is in China. So it's this guy out of China who my friend connected me with. It works. It's awesome.
No, I always tell everyone, I mean, like, China has some of the most advanced factories in the world, and so does India. It's silly to think that whatever comes out of there is trash. They make some of the most complex things.
It was so interesting because there's so much xenophobia around like the idea of like made in China means
made in
like
China.
Yeah.
There were people like who talked about it in my comments, and I just had to delete the thread because it was just like, I was like, there's people who are like so like ingrained with that idea that like China doesn't have, like, for example, a lot of people still don't think China has like a middle class or something like that. So they're like not even able to engage in like any conversation about it, and it was interesting.
I mean, that's sick though. You were able to find something that really works for you, and they have lasers, guys. They're making clothes with lasers,
and it's a good factory out there. We were able to find, there's a lot of variety of what a factory is like. I think there's definitely an image in everyone's head about like, made in China means unethical,
like a sweatshop. It's like hell in there.
Definitely not the case. You definitely have to be careful. Again, the fact, like, my process to find a factory took 2 years. One of the most interesting things I did find was I found a factory in Los Angeles that I almost produced through. And I thought, made in America, this is going to be great. And then my buddy who showed me the factory ended up saying, hey man, just to let you know, I think this factory might not be very ethical. And that's
I was just about to say that the flip side, just as made in China doesn't necessarily mean trash, made in other places doesn't necessarily mean good either. Like I've heard that about certain Los Angeles factories. I can think of at least a couple in Portugal that make a lot that are basically just sweatshops for a lot of the big, like, higher end brands,
Yeah.
And that's like a really broader conversation we need to have as a community, is like stop like associating with either quality or ethicality. Because like a crazy fact I saw from The Economist is that in 22 of US states, the average garment worker in China is paid more. Which is crazy.
Oh no!
That's like, it's how it is.
I mean, that is wild. And I remember reading, there was like this article somewhere at some point where it was all about like all these things that are made in Italy. And obviously Italy has all of this prestige around it. But like there are a lot of factories specifically in the garment industry where it's like, it's made in Italy. Everybody came from China. All of like the whole system is just Chinese, and they just transplanted it on there. So, if you're so invested in buying, a name on a tag, you might get got. Can you tell us? So the Swans hoodie, it's not named after a bird.
No,
it's named after a band.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the original kind of thought of it was like at the time it was during COVID, and I think like when I was making this design, I was just really getting introduced and interested into like brutalist design theory. And something along with that, I listened to a lot of the Swans, particularly their first few records. Really interesting kind of industrial dark music that just pairs very well with brutalism for some reason. It just kind of, they went together. They're both kind of these weird, ugly, but yet beautiful byproducts of like industrialization.
Yes.
And I just kind of, so much of like my early thoughts around this were just like listening to those Swans records, especially like Filth and like Young Cop. I loved just like thinking about this and getting it done. And yeah, it was just kind of comes down to like something, maybe not less about like the messaging of the band, but more about like just that industrial like sound just kind of really influenced how I thought about like this hoodie and everything with brutalism involved. And yeah,
that's cool and hard. Bonk said, he said a bad word. Now I gotta buy it, don't I? You can't. It's sold out.
It's actually sold out. Yeah. Well, part of like the business structure is that this will definitely be restocked at some point.
Okay.
Probably next year. We will see. There will probably be minor improvements to it, but yeah, like a lot of the idea around my business is like, or the business, I don't know, like it's just like,
oh yeah,
making sure like when we're releasing items, they're like part of a permanent collection. Someone who really inspired me, even though I don't really love their designs, is Carol Christian Powell, where he just releases the same thing every year because he believes that what he's released is like seasonless. It's like these are like lifelong products. And that's kind of like the way I kind of go down it. Like I'm not a huge fan of like the like seasons, and like obviously there's something to be said about releasing a t-shirt in the summer versus, you know, a parka in the winter.
In the summer. Yeah.
But you know, like what I also want to do is like make sure like that we're not kind of going by a trend cycle. I don't want to have that be involved and like always trying to keep up, release the next thing. It's like once the design is put out into the world, we're going to try to keep that until there's something really wrong with it, or we need
okay,
you know.
Yeah.
So truly like the idea of like these are essentials and they'll be restocked, but it just might be a little while.
Can I ask where, I mean, you mentioned Ken, where do you think like this brand exists in the pantheon of YouTube brands? Because there's a lot.
There's a lot. I think, I mean, I talked to a lot of those guys. I didn't talk to Ken specifically. And I took a lot of inspiration. I watched them all like hawks, straight up, like just like understand it. Where it exists in the pantheon. I mean, someone I talked to a lot about like the business side of it was Owen, because he is
Wyatt?
Hyatt, yeah, Owen Hyatt. Because
Wyatt.
The way he operates his business, what is more again akin to having a long-term view versus like how are we gonna have a drop be successful.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily think about like, is this drop gonna be successful versus is this next year gonna be successful. So thinking long-term is something definitely that I've been doing. You know, there's so many, the whole thing was inspired by like fashion YouTube brands, and I think it's very cool. I definitely want to take it further than that idea. Fashion YouTube merch.
Yeah.
Because I think that's not necessarily a sustainable like way to think about it. No. More, you know, like a true business. But yeah, definitely like my first inspiration for this was Avery Ginsberg, of course, because
of course all of us. Why aren't any of us here?
Yeah, and I think like, you know, he was like the first of the YouTuber kind of fashion dudes to do something that felt like very true and artistic and original, I think.
Yeah.
Not to say that nobody else is doing that today, but like I think the first of
a
lot of those people to be doing something where you're like, oh wow, this is something that's not trend based or like a product. This is expression. And so definitely, you know, a lot of respect for him. Other people, Jakov was huge. Keezy was,
I love that guy.
Yeah, he's awesome. Ray Mia.
Yeah.
Just crazy. But yeah, like all of those guys, I took little pieces from everybody, I think. Or I don't know if they've all like shown themselves, but I'm, you know, looking at what everyone's doing and considering it for myself. Yeah.